Let's dig into what should happen now to ease the crisis. Is there anything the federal government can do to address poverty and despair in remote communities like this one? Joining me not from the foyer of the House of Commons, but here in studio, Michel Picard. He is Mr. Goodale's parliamentary secretary. Aaron O'Toole is the Conservative public safety critic. And Charlie Angus is the NDP's critic for Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for rushing down. We had some technical issues up there, so I appreciate you doing that. I want to start by playing a clip of the AFN chief, Perry Bellegarde, who was in Loche yesterday, and he said something that sort of struck me and probably struck you if you've heard it, so I'll play that for our audience and we'll talk about it.
This strategy speaks to the need to really work together to develop that long-term strategy, provide hope for our young people, and make sure that there's a strategy to end that violence in our communities right across Turtle Island, north, south, east and west.
So obviously not just addressing what happened in Loche, but what perhaps is a much bigger, broader problem. I'll start with you, Mr. Picard. What does the federal government think it can do to deal with what happened in this community or more broadly?
I think that broadly is the word, because that's the reason why Mr. Goodale went to Loche to listen to what the committee has to say, share their concerns, recommendations, suggestions, whatever they would like to share with us in order to, for the future, have a much wider approach on what they need there, but also elsewhere, because it's not an isolated case.
It's not an isolated case, but it's an isolated community that has had some red flags over the past number of years. Suicide rates have been very hard. That's gotten a little bit of media attention. Is there more that the government could be doing in terms of mental health? Are you deploying, obviously, crisis teams, but over the longer term?
Yeah, longer term, as you mentioned, it's not to blame what has been done in the past, but look for future solutions. And these solutions need to be community up instead of top down. So therefore, with the sharing of information, it's a fact that we do consider services for young people, housing issues, mental health, that, as you mentioned, are some example from the many ones that we have to consider to work with the community in order to put the proper measure according to their needs.
What do you think should be done here, Mr. O'Toole? I mean, you know, just take away the specifics of the case, which everyone's still trying to understand, but the reality that there is very little in the community, as Carolyn was mentioning there, full unemployment, there's nothing to do, there's no jobs.
Yeah, well, first, Rosie, I do want to say I think it was important that all the House of Commons, all MPs stood in a moment of silence and in solidarity with the community. In fact, the teacher that was tragically killed was from my area, Uxbridge, Ontario, and that community, a small town, is reeling. I think you've identified some of the issues and particular challenges, remote communities in particular, with employment challenges, really have to have a long-term plan, and part of that needs to be getting young people into the resource economy. That's in parts of northern Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the north. That is a big opportunity for employment, because if there is no long-term prospect, you'll either have the community being hollowed out even more by people leaving, or some of the rates you talked about, 3 times the provincial rate for suicide, that sort of thing. So these are senseless crimes that, you know, we have to learn from to see if there was any indications prior to that could have led to an intervention. But I think longer term, we should look at opportunities, and that's why you can't say we don't have a resource economy, particularly where in parts of rural Canada, and northern Saskatchewan in particular, that's a big option that needs to be explored.
Charlie?
Well, let's put the issue of pipelines aside for a moment and talk about what happens on the ground in these communities.
You have some of these remote communities.
This could have been any community in northern Canada. And what really needs to be understood is that these children are deliberately left falling through the cracks because of the funding games that are played with the province, the feds, and then within the federal department. So they routinely reject applications for mental health services. It's supposed to be paid through the province, and the feds are supposed to pay them back. We went through in James Bay, Peo-Catano region, a suicide crisis in 2009 where 90 young people were attempting to kill themselves, and they were laying off the frontline staff because they said, we're not going to pay for the interventions. That would never happen in a white community, never. So we're looking at a systemic issue of, we talk about being there, but it is the long-term problems that we're facing. And, you know, again, in Mushkegowuk territory, they just announced 600 young people since 2009 attempted to take their lives. the funding that's needed, the mental health services, the counseling, the support, it just does not happen because it is played through this bureaucratic game.
But some of it, Charlie, is also the isolation of the community, right?
Certainly,
they have
Rosemary.
to fly in psychiatrists
Yeah,
to help
but
deal
I
with
think
kids.
the issue is that, you know, we talk about the communities are isolated. They are. But these are communities where children are regularly denied access to quality education. So how are they going to get their, you know, these great jobs that are supposed to be out there? How are they going to rebuild their economy? Communities ask for support when there's a suicide crisis, and I've been at too many funerals of them. And what happens is a bureaucrat in Ottawa or Queen's Park or in Regina will just say rejected. And that's part of the problem, is we have to put the children first for a change and say that we're going to actually make sure that the talk meets it, and we're going to fund mental health services just like we would in any other community in this country.
So as I said, I talked to the former chief a little bit later, and the litany of problems that he sees in the community to me seemed almost insurmountable. And yet, in spite of this, the community today and yesterday is expressing some hope that they can get past it, they can, you know, move on, they can find some solutions. What is the government looking at in the short term in terms of, you know, what can you do? I'm not talking about crisis management in terms of coping with people. I'm talking about things that you can do for these kids, for the community who obviously feels somewhat abandoned here.
But the fact of the crisis management is a short-term issue because it's what is most important for now. On the medium and long-term approach, it's clearly the support that we have provided so far will continue to be provided. The ministers, health, public safety, anyone we can have can put a hand to the wheel to help this community. We'll talk together, but based on what their specific needs are, instead of trying to impose on themselves, well, they should go there, they should have this. We need it's tough during a crisis like this, but in the same time, it's maybe the best time to share and to listen to what they need in their specific region, in accordance with the other example that we have in other communities.
I guess my point is we have potentially known what this community needs for a long time, and nothing has really been done about it. And I'm not saying that's anybody's fault, but nothing's really been done about it. And there does seem, if you read, you know, stories about the community, to be a disconnect between what they used to be, their ability to speak their own language, their cultural attachment, and what they are now. So is there anything the government can do on that front, or is that the government's role to try and reconnect them to that?
I think as of today, I will not address a grocery list of specific needs because it's an exchange that will take more than one few days. But this is at least the first step why Mr. Goodale went there to listen to what they need specifically, to which we will add what we can provide in addition to that, to have these and other communities in line with something more promising.
What do both of you say to that sort of, you know, still what to me is always surprising and impressive amount of hope in the face of tragedy and sort of, as the chief says, or the former chief says to me later, sort of intergenerational problems that they have dealt with. Like, how do you fix that?
There's two aspects to this tragedy, Rosie. The first immediate one is, how can we prevent anything like this from happening again? Were there any of these telltale signs within the school and the community? Some stories are leaking out. So we should learn from that. Law enforcement, particularly the RCMP, which is really the front line in these communities, learns from that. The second aspect, and we've been talking about that, is the longer-term challenge for the economy, for opportunity for young people in these communities. I didn't mention pipelines. I mentioned resources. In Northern Ontario, as Charlie would know, forestry, a whole range of resource industries has to be part of the solution. But I think all levels of government, First Nation, provincial, and federal, need to talk about, particularly with the challenges remote communities bring to health, to mental health supports, a whole range. So it should be at all three levels working together to provide opportunity.
That's right to you, Charlie.
Well, Rosemary, in terms of the message of hope, when you come into communities in the far north and you see the potential in young people, these young people could transform our country. And yet it seems that they are the last factored into anything when a government policy happens. So what are we going to learn from this is that Loche is every community in Northern Canada, and we got to start putting the children first. We have to start saying that every child is going to have access to a quality education, that we're not going to leave communities without the supports they need to help their young people, because the young people really are going to be the future. How can we squander the potential of another generation of young people? It's happened too often. So I think this could be a wake-up call for us. I think from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the Canadians are looking to Parliament. They're saying, do the right thing. Are the solutions simple? No. But the solution starts when we say we're going to have to start to deal with this systematically and in the long term.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, gentlemen. Tough topic. Appreciate you weighing in. Michel Picard, Aaron O'Toole, and Charlie Angus, and thanks for hustling down again.
Thank you.
Coming up on